Welcome back to abettersociety.info. This is our 18th video in our regular series, and this is kind of a transition, or maybe the last video was a transition, in which the previous videos were setting a foundation for what we want to begin to talk about now. In the previous videos we talked about three different types of societal structures. One of them was the hunter-gatherer, very simplistic societal structure. Then there was the class-based societies, which were much more complex, and they all involved agriculture, animal husbandry, and involuntary servitude. And then eventually people came up with the idea of having a classless society. And of course, a classless society would mean that everyone in the society is a first-class citizen. See, in the class-based society that wasn't the case. Only the monarch class and the aristocracy class, those people would be considered to be the first-class citizens. And everybody else was might be called a second-class citizen, or maybe they wouldn't be considered citizens at all. They, in various different ways, had to work for the first-class citizens, and the produce of their work went to the first-class citizens. And so the idea came along, very recent times, last several hundred years, in fact, of having a society where everybody is a first-class citizen, a classless society. And of course that's very different from what went on for thousands and thousands of years. And I think that's one of the points that we want to make about this, that class-based societies have been the rule of law for, thousands of years, maybe 13, 14, 15,000 years. Now that's a long time, and it was all over the world, except for those places that still had hunter-gatherer societies. So, this is the idea of a classless society, of everyone being a first-class citizen, is a new idea. So what we want to do is look at that in terms of American history. And I think we're going to look at that in two videos. The first one, this one, we want to talk about what went on between, say, 1607, which was when the first English people came to this area where we live, in Virginia, and then we'll carry that on up into the Civil War. And all during that period of time, from 1607 up to the end of the Civil War and a few years right after it, the United States, the British colony America, was a class-based society. And that was just a normal progression, because in all of European history, 1,000 years before that, that had been the way the society was. I mean, that's just the way it was. And so there were slaves, there was involuntary servitude in a variety, in different ways. Most of the slavery that had been in England, there were slaves in England, and sometime we'll go back and look at that. But there was also other types of involuntary servitude. We talked about the villeins, the serfs, those people who were bound to the land. I mean, they were not free to just go do what they wanted to do. And if you were born a serf or a villein, you're going to be a serf or villein the rest of your life, because your parents were. So having involuntary servitude and slavery in the colonial America and in the United States, when the United States was formed, was just a natural progression. But during that period of time, people started to think about the value of liberty, the value of having people be first-class citizens. So what happened was that when we overthrew the English government, the class-based society, that was the period of time when people had already been thinking about a classless society. And so when the government was formed, it was formed on the basis of there being first-class citizens. and all the Caucasians would be the first-class citizens. And of course that was the major difference, that they hadn't yet come up with a way to make it so that there would be, everyone was a first-class citizen. At that particular point, there were first-class citizens, and those people were the people who came from Europe. And yes, beginning in the Jamestown era, they started importing people from Africa, and they were in a condition of real slavery, where they were owned, they could be sold, they could be summarily punished for doing things that were wrong, and so that was the institution that was established. But in the American South and also in the North, there was slavery. There was more slaves in the South than there were in the North, but slavery was recognized as an institution, and there started to be a movement that said there shouldn't be any slaves, that everybody should be free and everybody should be a first-class citizen. And of course, the Civil War was fought to try to accomplish that. And after the Civil War, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments were placed into the Constitution, which was no involuntary servitude except in case you were convicted of a crime, equal rights in the 14th Amendment, and the right to vote in the 15th Amendment. So the war was fought, the war on the battlefield was won, and for a brief period of time, the concept of instituting first-class citizenship to all people in the United States was attempted. And that's where we were a few years after the Civil War. And usually that's where the history stops, and that's what we'll talk about in the next video. So I'll talk with you later.